Today, we're diving into a really ambitious, maybe even mind-bending look at the future. It's ARK Invest's Big Ideas 2026 report, and really, it's a new kind of map for understanding the huge technological shifts that could completely redefine our world in just the next few years. So let's get right into it. The report kicks off with this quote, and it really sets the stage perfectly. The whole idea here isn't about having a crystal ball. It's about spotting the signs, seeing the connections before they become obvious to everyone else. It's basically a call to action, framing the absolutely massive scale of the opportunities we're about to explore. So, what's the single biggest idea at the heart of this whole thing? Well, they call it the Great Acceleration. And the argument is actually pretty simple, but it's also incredibly profound. It's not just that we have new technologies coming out, it's that the actual pace of innovation itself is hitting a major turning point and speeding up like crazy. But how is this acceleration any different from the past? I mean, think about it. We've had huge inventions like railroads or electricity, right? But they mostly grew on their own separate tracks. What's happening today is totally different. Technologies are now creating this powerful, self-reinforcing cycle, where progress in one area literally ignites an explosion of progress in another. Okay, so what's the engine behind this massive acceleration? The report says it all comes down to one key dynamic: technological convergence. And this is where it gets really interesting, because it's not about these technologies in isolation anymore. It's all about how they slam together and combine. Just think of it like this. For the longest time, technologies grew up in their own little boxes, their own silos. We're moving away from that world. Instead, as you can see here, they're becoming this interconnected web. They're meshing together, and one is sparking the next. An advance in just one little node on this web creates a ripple of brand new possibilities for everything it's connected to. So what are these core technologies that are driving everything? ARK boils it down to 5 foundational platforms that are basically the pillars of this entire new era. You've got artificial intelligence, of course, public blockchains, robotics, energy storage, and finally multiomics, which is just a fancy way of saying we can study a whole universe of biological data, from your genes to proteins, all at the same time. These are the big 5. And among those 5, there's one that stands out as the main event, the primary catalyst. The report calls AI the central dynamo. It's the critical enabler. It's the tech that is supercharging the potential of all the others. You can almost think of it as the sun that the other innovation planets are now starting to orbit around. Now, I know this idea of convergence can feel a little abstract, a little academic. So let's make it real. Let's make it tangible with a pretty wild case study from the report. The totally unexpected meeting of artificial intelligence and, you guessed it, space. So first, let's set up the problem. Training and running these huge AI models takes a staggering, almost unbelievable amount of computing power. And this massive hunger for electricity and just plain physical space is already starting to bump up against the limits of what we can do here on Earth. So the question is, where do we go from here? Where can we possibly put it all? And here it is. This is that mind-bending solution that only happens because of convergence. What if? What if you used one disruptive technology, like reusable rockets, which falls under the robotics platform, to solve the scaling problem of a completely different one? The idea is to build the next generation of AI data centers up in orbit, in space, where you're free from all those earthly limits on power and cooling. And listen, this isn't just some small niche idea. Look at this number. According to ARK's analysis, the demand for all that AI compute could drive up the need for reusable rocket launches by a factor of 60. That's 60 times. That is just a stunning example of how 2 fields that seem to have nothing to do with each other can converge and create entirely new, massive industries out of thin air. All right, let's zoom back out. We've seen how these technologies can converge in a really specific way. But what does this mean for the global economy? Well, the report projects that this acceleration won't just be a little bump in the road. It could fundamentally reshape our entire economic world as we know it. To really understand the potential impact, let's start with a simple example: household labor. All the cooking, cleaning, yard work, and maintenance. Right now, of all that work done to run a home, only about $2,600 per household each year is paid labor that actually gets counted in official economic numbers like GDP. Okay, now contrast that with this projection. Imagine a single humanoid robot in a household. It could take all of that unpaid, uncounted labor, and even more, and turn it into measured economic activity. The report estimates that this alone could add a staggering $62,000 to GDP per household. It's not creating new work, it's just making invisible work visible to the economy. So what happens when you add all that up on a global scale? Well, just look at the difference here. While the standard forecasts from groups like the IMF see global growth kind of hovering around 3%, ARC's model, the one that factors in this great acceleration, projects it could be more than double that, hitting over 7% by 2030. We're talking about a potential economic boom on a scale we haven't seen before. So, this kind of massive step change in economic growth, well, it implies a huge shift in value all across the global markets. So the big question is, what happens next? Where's all this capital and value going to flow? And this right here, this is where it all leads. For most of history, innovation has been a pretty small slice of the total public stock market. But the projection here is that by 2030, companies that are built around these disruptive, converging technologies could grow to represent the majority of the entire global market. That's not just a trend, that is a truly seismic shift in value. So we'll leave you with this final thought. The core idea here is really a new framework. It's a new way of seeing how these seemingly separate technologies can combine to create exponential change. So now that you have this lens of convergence, what's the next unexpected connection, the next big idea that you see emerging out there on the horizon?